I didn't knock. I didn't step forward. I just stood there, cake in my hands, listening to the kind of laughter that tells you everything you need to know. Not a moment of hesitation in their voices, not even a whisper of kindness. And maybe that's what cut the deepest. Not the words themselves, but the ease with which they were spoken. Like I was nothing more than a joke passing through. I stood there for a moment longer, heart sinking into my shoes, and then I turned around. No one saw me. No one called my name. The lights inside stayed bright, the laughter carried on, and I faded into the night like I had never been part of that house at all. If you're still watching, thank you. Truly. I know this isn't just my story. It's one that lives in a lot of quiet corners. Maybe you've shown up for someone too, with your hands full and your heart wide open, only to feel like your presence wasn't a gift, but a problem. Maybe you've stood at a door that was once yours and felt like a stranger. If that's you, then you're not alone. And if you've ever been made to feel like your love was too heavy, too much, or simply unwanted, then I hope this story reminds you that the way people treat you says more about them than it ever will about you. I didn't knock. I didn't step forward. I just stood there, cake in my hands, listening to laughter that told me everything I needed to know. Not a single pause in their voices, not a hint of warmth. And maybe that's what hurt most. Not the words, but how easy they came. Like I was never part of anything at all. I turned around without a sound. No one saw me. No one called out. The light stayed bright, the door stayed open, and I walked back into the rain like I'd never been there to begin with. Thank you for listening. I know some of you understand that feeling too well. Showing up with love, only to find you were never wanted in the first place. If you've ever stood in that kind of silence, just know you're not the only one. And your story matters too. It didn't start this way, not at all. He used to look at me like I was his whole world. And truth be told, he was mine. I raised him alone, not by choice but by the weight of what life gave me. His father left before he could even say his first word. And from that moment on, every decision I made was with him in mind. I worked long hours in a hospital laundry room, folding sheets until my knuckles cracked, then came home to help him with homework, or warm up a bowl of rice and stew we'd stretch across 3 nights. I never let him feel the lack. If there was only one egg left, it was his. If I had only enough money for one gift, it had his name on it. I remember the birthdays especially, just the 2 of us in that little kitchen. A single candle stuck in a cupcake when money was tight. He'd close his eyes so seriously, like the wish really mattered, and I'd watch him blow that candle out like it was magic. And in those moments it felt like we had everything. I didn't care about the noise outside our walls or what other families had. I only cared that he felt safe and loved and never alone. He was quiet growing up, but thoughtful, always asking if I was tired, if I'd eaten, if I needed help bringing in groceries. That kind of tenderness isn't taught, it's felt. I poured everything into him. Every penny, every ounce of strength, every heartbeat I had, it went into making sure he had a chance at something better than what I'd known. And for a while it seemed to be working. He got older, got through school, found steady work. Then he met her. She was polite at first. Pretty smile, soft voice, and always saying how thankful she was that I raised him well. But people can say a lot of things when they're trying to win space in your life. The shift wasn't sudden. It came in quiet, like a draft under a door you didn't realize was cracked open. Less phone calls, shorter visits, holidays where I wasn't sure if I should wait or just eat alone. By the time they married, I already felt the distance. I just didn't want to admit it. I told myself it was just the adjustment, that newlyweds needed time. I stayed patient. I kept showing up. And every time I did, I told myself the same thing. He'll come around. He'll remember. Because how could someone forget the person who gave up everything so they could stand taller? But sometimes the people you lift the highest are the first to look down on you. I didn't get an invitation that year. No call. No message. Not even a passing mention the week before. But I knew his birthday was coming. I'd carried that date in my heart for over 30 years. It wasn't something I could forget, even if he seemed to. And so I waited. Each morning, I checked my phone, hoping maybe he'd say something. A simple, "Come by if you can," would have meant the world. But nothing came. Not on Monday. Not on Wednesday. By Saturday morning, I stopped hoping and started moving. I went to the market early, bought everything I needed for the cake: dark cocoa, real butter, fresh cream. I didn't take shortcuts. I never had, not when it came to him. I stood in that small kitchen of mine, apron tied tight, windows fogging up from the warmth of the oven, and I mixed everything by hand, just like I used to. That cake had a story. It had history. It was the one I made when he got his first job, the one he asked for every year, even when he was grown. Triple chocolate, thick frosting, and those little chocolate curls on top that took time and patience. I made them anyway. While the cake cooled, I wrapped his gifts. Nothing extravagant, just things I knew he needed, and maybe one thing I hoped he'd smile at. I used gold paper because it felt like celebration. I tied the ribbons twice, once to hold it together, and again just to be sure. Everything I did that morning was careful, thoughtful, filled with the kind of love that doesn't ask to be noticed. It just gives and gives and gives. By afternoon, the clouds were already rolling in. The forecast said storms, but I looked at the cake, sitting proud on the counter, and I told myself, "You've weathered worse for him." I packed everything into the back seat, nestled the cake on the passenger side, seatbelt wrapped snug around the box like it was precious cargo. Then I locked the door behind me, got in the car, and started the engine. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I wanted it to be a surprise. The kind that tugs at the heart, the kind that makes you say, "She remembered." Because I always did. No matter how quiet he became, I remembered. I thought about what I'd say when I got there. Maybe I'd ring the bell and hold up the cake like a peace offering. Maybe we'd sit down and he'd remember who I was, what I'd always been. Not just the woman who raised him, but the one who stood in his corner before he had a name for the world. I let myself believe it. I needed to. Because sometimes when you're left out by the people you once would have moved mountains for, you start telling yourself little stories just to make the silence feel softer. The rain started before I hit the halfway point. Heavy and fast. But I kept going. I kept both hands on the wheel and my heart steady. I didn't know what was waiting, but I told myself, whatever it is, it'll be worth it. Because you're showing up, and that should count for something. The sky had turned the color of bruised metal by the time I left the city limits. The kind of gray that sinks down low and settles into your bones. The rain came down in waves, not drops, heavy enough to drum against the windshield, like it was trying to shake me off the road. I adjusted the wipers, leaned forward in my seat, and tightened both hands around the steering wheel. Every few minutes, the tires would hiss over standing water, and the car would sway just enough to make my heart skip. But I didn't turn back. I kept going, mile after mile, eyes fixed ahead, knuckles white with tension. The kind of drive where you forget the radio's on, and the silence starts talking to you. I thought about his little hands wrapped around my pinky the day he was born. I thought about his first day of school, when he turned back 3 times just to wave at me. I thought about all the nights I stayed up waiting for him to come home. Sitting by the window with the porch light on and a blanket around my shoulders, praying he was safe. And now here I was, doing the same thing in a different way. Driving toward him through thunder and sleet, holding on to hope like it was something I could keep warm. The signs blurred past, water streaking across the glass. Trucks roared by in the opposite lane, splashing up sheets of muddy water that smacked the side of my car and made it tremble. But I didn't stop. Not when I missed an exit and had to circle back. Not when I passed the familiar rest stop and thought about pulling over. Not even when a flash of lightning split the sky and lit up the road like a camera flash, blinding me for a second. I gripped the wheel tighter, blinked away the light, and kept going. There was a moment, just before the last turn, when the back of the car fishtailed ever so slightly. I'd hit a patch of standing water, and for a breathless second, I felt the tires lose their grip. My heart leapt into my throat. I eased off the gas, corrected the wheel, and whispered to myself, "Hold on." I didn't know if I was talking to the car, to the cake in the seat beside me, or to the part of me that still believed this trip would matter. But I held on. I looked over at the box, still perfectly upright. The ribbons hadn't slipped. The handwriting on the card taped to the lid hadn't smudged. It was all still there, waiting to be seen, waiting to be received. I imagined him opening the door, seeing me soaked and shivering and breaking into a smile. I imagined the surprise in his eyes, the kind that only comes from knowing someone chose to show up when they didn't have to. But the closer I got, the heavier everything began to feel. The air, the silence in the car, the weight of all those years that had somehow drifted between us. The rain didn't let up. If anything, it came harder, louder, like the sky itself was testing me. But I didn't stop. I had come too far to turn back now. This wasn't just a visit, it was a reminder. A message wrapped in cake and ribbon and miles of road. I was still here. I had always been here. And I was bringing that truth straight to his door. By the time I pulled up to their house, the rain had turned to a steady mist, light enough to blur the windows but not enough to soften the cold. I stepped out slowly, cradling the cake in both arms, the hem of my coat already soaked from brushing against the side of the car. My shoes sank into the wet gravel of the driveway, and each step felt heavier than the last. Their porch light was on. The curtains in the living room were open, and through the foggy glass, I could see shadows moving, arms gesturing, people laughing. It looked warm inside, bright, like a place where love might still live. I climbed the steps carefully, pressing my back against the wind. I didn't knock right away. I stood under the little overhang, catching my breath, adjusting the ribbon on the box where it had started to peel. My hand was just reaching for the door when I realized it wasn't shut all the way. Not locked. Just pulled to. The way you leave it when you're expecting someone who's allowed to come in. My heart gave a little flicker, a whisper of hope telling me maybe, just maybe, they had been waiting after all. I pushed it open slowly, careful not to make a sound. The warmth hit me first, that wave of comfort that comes from stepping out of the rain. My eyes adjusted to the light and I took one step inside, cake held tight, hoping someone would turn, see me, smile. But they didn't. What I heard next stopped me where I stood. Ah, I hope she crashes. She ruins everything. Her voice, clear as a bell, sharp and careless. I stood frozen, rainwater dripping from my coat onto their floor. My ears rang, my heart beat loud, but no one noticed. They were too busy laughing. And then I heard it. His laugh. Not forced, not awkward, just comfortable. Like the joke made sense. He didn't say that's not funny. He didn't say don't talk about her like that. He didn't say anything at all, just joined in. Like I was a punchline. Like I hadn't just spent the day trying to bring him a piece of his childhood wrapped in frosting and love. In that moment, I didn't feel wet anymore. I didn't feel cold. I didn't even feel angry. I felt small, smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. Not because of the words, but because of the silence that followed them. The silence where he should have stood up. The silence that told me exactly where I stood. I turned around slowly, the cake still in my hands, and stepped back out into the mist without a sound. I stepped off their porch as quietly as I had arrived, the door easing shut behind me without a single creak, like even the house didn't want to make a sound. The wind had picked up again. Not harsh, just enough to remind me I was no longer somewhere warm. I walked down the steps slowly, not because I was unsure, but because something in me had gone still. My fingers were stiff from the cold, but I held the cake like it was something sacred, like it still deserved better than the room it had just nearly entered. I stood there on the edge of their porch, staring at the gold ribbon, the careful handwriting on the tag, the frosting I had smoothed with the back of a spoon just hours earlier. It wasn't just dessert, it was memory, it was effort. It was 30 years of showing up. I took one last look through the window. No one had noticed. They were still inside, still laughing, still full of voices that didn't need mine to feel complete. I bent down slowly and set the cake on the porch bench, right in front of the door where he'd see it later. Maybe when the music died down, or the guests left, or the wind swept through. I placed it gently, wiped the water from the lid, and straightened the ribbon where it had curled. I didn't knock. I didn't leave a note. I didn't want to explain myself anymore. Sometimes silence says everything. As I turned back toward my car, the sky opened up again. The rain came soft but steady, soaking through my sleeves and catching in my hair, but I didn't flinch. I walked back the way I came, one foot after the other, not hurried, not dragging, just walking. Somewhere between the porch and the driver's seat, something shifted in me. I didn't crash like she'd hoped, but something in me cracked open, quietly, like a door you never realized was holding so much behind it. I closed the car door, buckled in, and sat there for a long moment, letting the rain tap its rhythm on the roof. My hands rested in my lap. There was no yelling, no dramatic goodbye. Just the soft ache of knowing I had brought everything I had to the door of someone who didn't even notice I'd been there. And when I drove away, headlights cutting through the mist, I knew this wasn't the kind of hurt that fades. It was the kind that settles in slowly, not with fire, but with finality. The road looked different on the way back, even though it was the same stretch of highway. Same blinking signs, same turns, same lonely gas stations with their flickering lights and cold coffee. But everything felt heavier, like the car itself was dragging some invisible weight behind it. I didn't turn the radio on. I didn't hum. I didn't reach for the heat. I just drove, watching the rain chase itself down the windshield, mile after mile, while the ache in my chest grew thicker than the clouds above me. I kept glancing at my phone, every 10 minutes or so. Just a quick check, hoping to see something, anything, a message, a missed call, even just his name lighting up the screen. At one point, I pressed the button just to make sure it hadn't died. But the battery was fine. It wasn't my phone that had gone quiet. It was them. They knew I had come. They knew I had walked away. And still, nothing. I thought maybe he'd run out after me. Maybe when he saw the cake on the bench, he'd realize what I had done. Maybe he'd feel some piece of the boy I raised still beating in his chest. But no headlights followed me. No footsteps caught up. Just the sound of tires against wet pavement, and the wind brushing past the side mirrors like it wanted to keep me company. I drove past the halfway point before I let myself cry. Not loud, not messy, just quiet tears that slip down without permission. The kind you wipe away with the back of your sleeve, not because you're trying to hide them, but because they don't need an audience. I thought about how many times I'd driven that road, how many times I had shown up without being asked, and how this time, I finally got my answer. It's a strange thing, silence. It can comfort you, or it can crush you. That night, it did both. It told me everything I needed to know. No one missed me. No one looked for me. And the woman who had wished I'd crashed didn't even have to raise her voice again. Her words were already working. They didn't need a follow-up. They had done what they came to do. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still thick and low. I sat in the car for a moment, engine ticking quietly, headlights catching on the fence. And I thought, for the first time in a long time, maybe it was time to stop arriving where I was never really welcome. Maybe showing up, year after year, had only been delaying what had already happened a long time ago. I didn't stop because I was tired. I stopped because I finally understood. Some doors don't close with a slam, they just stop opening. The next morning came slow and gray, like it didn't know how to begin. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug I didn't bother to drink from, watching the steam curl and fade into nothing. I didn't cry again. I didn't replay the night or wonder what I could have done differently. I just sat there in the quiet, letting the truth settle in, not like a storm, but like dust that had always been there. I just hadn't seen it in the right light. I didn't call him. I didn't check if he'd called me. I already knew. If he hadn't reached out last night, soaked through and holding my heart in a cake box, he wouldn't be calling today. And I wasn't going to beg for the kind of love I had once been wrapped in like a blanket. That kind of love shouldn't need reminders. It shouldn't go missing when the room fills with laughter that doesn't leave room for you. But silence doesn't mean stillness. I picked up the folder from the drawer in my hallway cabinet, the one with all the papers I'd kept in order, all the forms I'd signed quietly, all the proof of how much I had stood behind him when no one else would. The business loan I'd co-signed when the bank told him no. The lease application I submitted under my name when his credit fell short. The car he drove, the one he said was a gift from a friend, it was mine. Registered, paid, insured, and protected by the woman who would have walked through fire for him. One by one, I made the calls. I didn't speak with anger. I didn't raise my voice. I just told the truth. I asked the bank to begin the separation process on the business account. I requested a formal notice on the lease termination, my name no longer tied. I called the insurance company, canceled the policy, and prepared the title for a transfer. Quiet steps. Simple ones. But each one cut a thread. Threads he hadn't realized were holding up the world he stood on. It felt strange, how steady my hands were as I filled out the paperwork. How calm I felt pressing the envelopes shut. I didn't do it out of spite. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because I finally saw the difference between being needed and being used. And I was done carrying the weight of someone who couldn't bear the thought of me showing up with a cake, but had no trouble standing on everything I'd built beneath him. He didn't know what he lost. Not yet. Because when you build your life on someone else's love without giving any back, you forget it's borrowed. And borrowed things, they can be returned. It didn't take long. Just a few days. I could almost hear the unraveling before the phone even rang. When you've held up someone's world for that long, the quiet collapse has a sound all its own. At first, there was nothing. No messages. No emails. But then, late one afternoon, my phone lit up with his name. I let it ring. I needed to hear it all the way through. The second call came 10 minutes later, then a third, and on the fourth, I answered. His voice cracked before he could even get the words out. Not angry, not even confused, just scared. Mom, what's going on? The business account's frozen. They said the lease is in trouble. I don't understand. Did you do this? I didn't rush to answer. I let the silence stretch just enough for the weight of his question to settle where it belonged. Then I said it, slow and steady. You laughed when they wished me dead, and now, you're listening to silence. He stammered. I didn't mean it. It wasn't like that. I didn't even... But there's always a pause when truth catches up. He couldn't finish the sentence. He knew. And I didn't need to explain. He asked if we could talk. If we could meet. Said things were happening too fast, that I was making a mistake. But what he didn't understand, what people like him rarely do, is that it wasn't sudden. None of it was. It was the last page in a long book I had been writing alone. It just happened to be the only part he bothered to read. He cried. Not loud, but desperate. The kind of crying that comes from realizing the safety net has been pulled and the ground below you isn't as solid as you thought. He asked why I didn't say anything sooner. I almost laughed, but not out of cruelty. Just out of the kind of disbelief that comes when someone who hasn't been listening suddenly wants to hear everything all at once. I told him I had said everything I needed to say the night I showed up with that cake. I said it in the baking, in the driving, in the standing at the door, and when I turned around without a word, I said it again, clearer than any sentence I could put together now. There are moments when silence is the loudest answer you'll ever give. He didn't hang up right away. He waited. Maybe for softness, maybe for forgiveness, but I had given softness for 30 years. And all it had taught him was that I'd never walk away. So this time, I didn't yell. I didn't scold. I just said, handle your life now, the way you handled that room, without me. Then I hung up, quietly, and I didn't look back. It was 2 days after the call when I heard the knock. Not a loud one, not rushed, just a gentle tap like someone unsure if they were welcome. I wasn't expecting anyone. I had started to grow used to the quiet, to the way the house held its breath with me. I opened the door slowly, expecting a neighbor or a delivery left behind. But there she was, standing there in the afternoon light, hair damp from the drizzle, eyes wide like she wasn't sure if I'd answer at all. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me, then down at her shoes, then back up again. I could see it on her face, the same uncertainty I had carried up those steps not long ago. She held something in her hand. A card, bent at the corner, gold trim, from the cake box. She took a breath and said, I saw the cake. I knew it was you. I'm sorry for what they did. I hadn't cried through the laughter. I hadn't cried through the long ride home. I hadn't cried when I hung up the phone on the boy I once carried. But in that moment, with her voice so soft and her face so open, the tears came without asking. Not because I was hurting, but because someone had remembered. Someone had looked at that cake, at the ribbon I tied, and knew it came from love, from history, from me. I stepped aside, and she came in. She didn't ask to. She just knew she could, and I didn't need words after that. She sat at the table, pulled off her damp jacket, and looked around like the place hadn't changed. And truthfully, it hadn't. There were still pictures on the walls from birthdays long gone, Still marks on the doorway where he once stood while I measured his height every year. She looked at those and smiled. We talked a little, not about what happened, not about her father, just about music, school, her favorite books. She didn't try to fix anything, and I didn't need her to. Her presence was enough. Her remembering was enough. Before she left, she reached for my hand, held it like it meant something. I just wanted you to know, she said. You matter. You always have. And in that quiet, something inside me healed a little. Not because everything was right again, but because someone, somewhere in that house still had a heart. After she left, I sat there for a long time, yet the warmth of her hand still resting in mine like it had left behind a little light. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't clean the kitchen. I just sat, watching the rain return outside the window, softer now, like it had run out of anger. Everything around me was still, but inside, something was settling in a way it hadn't before. Not broken. Just rearranged. I thought about all the years I spent trying to prove my place, trying to be enough, trying to hold everything together so no one would feel the emptiness I had carried most of my life. And I realized something. Sometimes love isn't loud. It's not the one who yells the hardest or shows up with a banner. Sometimes love is quiet. It's steady. It's in the details. It's in the cake you bake by hand. It's in the hours spent behind the wheel through a storm. It's in the way you leave without slamming the door. And silence isn't weakness. It's a decision. A boundary. A final answer to a question that never should have had to be asked. You don't always need to scream to make a point. You just stop showing up. Stop explaining. Stop saving people who don't feel the weight of what you've carried. He always thought I'd come back, that no matter how far things went, I'd find my way at his doorstep again. Arms full, heart open, ready to try one more time. But what he didn't understand was that love has a limit. Not in how much it can give, but in how long it should be ignored. I used to think leaving meant giving up, that silence meant losing. But now I know better. Sometimes silence is the clearest truth you can offer. It's not absence. It's presence. Just in a different form. It's the way you protect what's when you finally understand that being there doesn't mean being seen. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need anyone to hurt the way I had. I just needed to step out of the storm I kept walking into. And once I did, I saw it all for what it was. A pattern. A habit. A house I kept trying to call home, even as it locked its doors one by one. Now, when the phone stays quiet, I don't flinch. When the door doesn't open, I don't wait. I know what my silence means, and if he ever chooses to listen, truly listen, he'll hear it too. If you've ever stood outside a door you once opened 1,000 times, only to hear your name turned into something unwanted, I see you. If you've ever shown up with love in your hands, and they met you with silence or laughter, just know it wasn't your heart that failed. It was theirs that forgot how to recognize something true. Comment if they ever made you feel small in the home you helped build. Subscribe if you've ever walked away. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring for yourself. I didn't crash. I just took the wheel back and chose a different road. Thank you for watching. See you on the next video.